We call ourselves short for Full A, AAAA. And our mission in short, I would say, is unity through arts. That's why we produced an annual Arizona Asian Festival.
My family's from Mexico. My grandfather came over on a work visa to help build all of the, our energy infrastructure, from the power plant, the nuclear thing, to the coal station up in northern Arizona. So, my family is entirely grateful for the opportunity we had, and we worked really hard, but we also grew up in poverty. So it was really hard I grew up wondering, why was it so hard for my family to make ends meet, to survive? I started getting involved in politics and realized a lot of what we live with is institutional. It's not just some accident that our wages are where they are and they've been there forever. People like to misuse statistics and numbers and talk about how the unemployment rate is so low right now, but that's because so many people have given up looking for jobs. A lot of this is what I've come to learn is politics controls so much of what what you're trying to do in your world. However you want to frame success, what success was for me and my family, what success is for your family, I've learned that it's entirely dependent upon public investment, on working in a community. I'm here today successful because I had a community that was totally behind me. They wanted me to be successful. And you're only going to be successful if a lot of people want you to be successful. And so that's the kind of government that I grew up wanting to be a part of. I learned that you have to create that. It's definitely not something that exists here. A lot of government has this sink or swim attitude towards people. Very individualistic, where if you're doing well, they're happy to do better. But as soon as you start falling behind, they blame it on you, like if it's your fault. And so that's a lot of the reason why I ran for office, was to change that attitude and create a government that wanted to see us all be successful, not just a select few that were already doing well. So today I'm a state senator. I started out in the House, sitting way in the back, next to the Pokemon. But I did the House for 4 years, and then I was able to transition over to the Senate. I just finished my first 2 years in the Senate, and I am the youngest sitting state senator currently, right now. Even after this next election, I'm pretty sure I'm still going to be the youngest sitting state senator. That's a little too much for me. I'm going to pass the mic along, and then...
I want to say thank you so much for being here. I was talking to Ryan, and he mentioned that you guys are all interested in learning more about politics, getting to know who represents you, really starting to understand how policies impact us every day. So I want to say thank you so much. I think it's really important and really powerful. I also acknowledge and recognize that Asian Americans are one of the fastest growing populations as well among Latinos. And I think that Asian Americans oftentimes share something in common with Mexican Americans, especially new generation Latinos from anywhere. I happen to be Mexican, but and that is that especially if you're new to the country, or if you're a first generation American, right? We have this amazing belief system in the American dream that if we come to the United States, like my parents brought me when I was 6 and a half, that if we work really hard and if we go to school, that we'll be successful. Of course, it's very true for Asian Americans. Everything shows that you guys have great success in the school system, unlike Latino kids, unfortunately. But I think that's driven by your family values and this idea of really working hard. So what I want to share with you guys is, oftentimes, and what we've been seeing in the last couple years in particular, is a divisiveness in terms of politics. But you have to start to understand that the way Republicans or Democrats in institutions like the state capitol here in Arizona or even in Washington, D.C., the divisiveness is to really break us apart, right? Regardless of our political affiliation, we can be independent, Democrat, Republican, leaning far left to one side or far left to the other side, but the reality is that most Americans, regardless of our backgrounds, what we want for ourselves and for our children is the ability to know that we're going to have a good job, that we're going to have access to a retirement plan, that we will be able to sustain ourselves and our families, be able to buy a home, be able to retire one day, and retire knowing that we won't have to worry about some things like healthcare. So if we could actually start coming together and having real discussions about policy, regardless of our political affiliation, if we are all driven to make sure that we as human beings are successful in doing well, then we can come together and become united. Why it's important that you guys start paying attention is because for too long, I think that people have been relying on the knowledge of people who represent us. And I hate to tell you this, unfortunately, the knowledge it doesn't exist. A lot of times it comes from lobbyists and the large corporations, and I know that we've used corporations very loosely. I'm going to be very more specific. Unfortunately, people in power come to power because of money. And the people who drive the money are the CEOs at corporations, right? Because they're making millions and billions of dollars, and so are their shareholders. One of the most amazing things about a lot of Asian Americans, that's true also of Latino Americans, is that you guys tend to start small businesses. And so oftentimes we leave small businesses behind. And it's our small businesses, organic small businesses are embedded in our community that really allow for our communities to grow and develop. I'm sure you can think of the communities that you go into. You may know all the small business owners. We have a favorite taco shop. It's owned by, the gentleman is Arab and his wife is Latina. They're trusted in the community. Anyway, so I just wanted to say thank you so much. Your presence here is really important. I know Ryan mentioned that you might be coming back in November. We really do want you to be engaged, to get to know us, because we're here to represent you. And in order for us as a community and as a society to truly move forward, we actually have to start talking to our constituents and engaging and really providing a thoughtful perspective in working together, especially young people, by the way.
Hello everyone, good morning, almost afternoon. Thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us today at the Capitol, and specifically to join us in the House of Representatives, the People's House. I currently sit in that back row, and every single day when we're in session and I sit there, it does not behoove me how much power is in this institution, especially when people from diverse backgrounds and diverse communities show up and exercise and utilize their voices. And for me, it's very personal. So I am State Representative Athena Salman. I'm an Arizona native, born and raised, but I come from a really unique family background. My grandfather was from Guadalajara, Mexico. He came in the 1950s on a worker visa. My grandmother is from Germany, was born in that country, also came to this country because they were seeking a better life. And then my father, I'm also the daughter of an immigrant. My father is Palestinian from the Middle East, and so he came in the 1970s as a student. And so even though my family members had different pathways in which they were able to come to this land of opportunity, a land that when you go back to the times that my family left their countries was much freer than the countries they had come from, the dream was consistent, and it was the same. That if you come to this country, regardless of your background, and you work hard, you can have a life where you can provide for your family. a life where you can seek out opportunities and experience things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to experience, you know. And for my family, it's incredible because neither of my parents grew up wealthy. They both grew up in poverty. But in this country at the time, because there was a government that was more supportive of the people, they were able to start a small business and enter the middle class. And as a millennial, I'm the youngest woman in the state legislature, but fortunately that will change with the new legislature. A 26-year-old woman got elected, so I'm excited to be serving with her. But for my generation, our elected officials have stopped serving the people and instead have ran with an agenda that benefits the wealthiest few in this country and abroad. And I believe this is also true of my seatmates, where we feel that government should return to its roots, where it's by the people, for the people, and of the people above all else. But that's not going to happen without everyone in this room and the people, the folks who couldn't make it today because unfortunately we weren't aware that they were going to close the chambers earlier at 2. But everyone in the community needs to be engaged. Everyone in the community needs to be voting, regardless of who you vote for. Just the act of increasing voter participation gets an elected official's attention. When they see that, they see, okay, so here's a community that can determine and decide whether or not I return to the Capitol or whatever position, the school board, the city council. There's so many positions out there. These people can have a difference in that election. And then the final step is coming and advocating for your community. And that can start off as simply as sharing your story. What's life like for you? Are you an immigrant? Are you the child or the grandchild of immigrants? Why is that important for our community, a community that's embedded in family values, but also for our local economy? Our economy for such a long time has been led and driven and reached innovations that otherwise would have not been reached if it were not for immigrants who brought ideas and perspectives from different parts of the world, whether that's Asia, the Middle East, Europe, Latin America, Africa. You know, in this country, we all benefit from one another. And we are excited to answer questions today. We're excited to welcome you to the House of Representatives. I have a conflicting meeting at 1, so I'm gonna have to step out a little early, but we are just very excited for you guys to join us, and we hope that, you know, this next time around, we'll try to set something up in September so you can see the Senate, and we're hoping that the whole group will get to come too, and maybe we can get some interactive programming for that day too,
So today will just be introductory, where we just go over how the legislature works and what our day-to-day life is kind of like. But we definitely would want to invite you back down here to take a more active citizenship role in terms of setting up meetings with your legislator, learning how to tell your story to your legislator, and then maybe even picking some kind of legislation and pushing for something, even in a nonpartisan way. I mean, there's tons of nonpartisan groups here that come down to us to educate us on what their community is like and what they would want to see for their community. So we'd love to welcome you for that. But to get some of the questions going, we'll do a little bit of like answer and calling, or back and forth. We are really proud of how diverse our representation is in the legislature, between our age and our ethnicity. We're one of the most diverse slates in the state legislature. And to really point it out, I mean, I kind of want to get an idea, if we could just get people to start guessing. So there are 60 state House representatives and 30 state senators, right? So 90 total. How many of those do you think are women? Does anybody just give me? 40? Is that like exactly right?
It's 40%.
40% actually. So we'll give you that. Yeah. So we're actually one of the highest state legislators with the highest women representation. We are the highest, yeah. And so even with this next election, with some of the results that look like they're going to come out, we might be even electing more women into the state legislature. So we're definitely, making strides on that. Then does anybody want to take an idea of how many, we'll go through some of the minorities, but so like the Asian minorities, does anybody want to guess, does anybody know how many Asian representatives that we have?
4. Asian current, only one.
Only one, yeah. And then so she's moving off to run for the state treasurer. So when we come back in January, we won't have any representation from the Asian community.
Well, we might have it because we have Anita Malik.
For Congress, yeah.
We have the Amish Shah.
Oh, wow, okay, yeah, Amish Shah.
And we have Harold
Tepernini.
In the congressional level. Yeah, okay, good.
Hopefully
So we'll hold on to the one in the state legislature. That'll be good. Does anybody want to guess how many Black Americans or African Americans are represented in the state legislature? 5. That's ambitious, yeah. I give you that. Only 2. Only 2, yeah. Out of 90 state representatives. How about, I don't know if I'm going through. Middle Eastern?
Yeah, you're looking at her.
One. And then, let's see, Latino?
It's higher. I don't know what the number is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of us.
There's 27 of us in our Latino caucus, right? And so outside of California, we have more Latino legislators than Colorado, New Mexico, Nevada,
Texas? That can't be right.
and maybe even Texas.
No.
Yeah. I know out of all the ones touching us, we have more.
Okay, that's different.
And then some of the other statistics, age. Does anybody want to guess what, the average age for your state legislator? No. So I won't just throw out the number because it's probably I don't want to embarrass a lot of people. But I'll just say the average person that we work with is so old that they have children that are our age.
Yeah, I don't know if we have a percentage, and it's a mixture, right? So you have folks whose highest formal education is high school degree, but professionally they've developed a background. Like in our Democratic caucus, we have a trade member who works for a railroading company, who's done a lot of negotiation with the company as a union leader. I think the representative you're referring to finished his bachelor's degree. So it's really, even in that realm. And then we have people with masters. We have people with who are attorneys, doctors. People who got their masters in public health or public administration. So even if you're looking at the legislature through a lens of education, there still is a lot of diversity within that.
So now I guess I'll go into what the average session is like for us when we get elected to office, right? And so to give you some context, there are only not even 10 states in the entire country that do a full year-long, full session legislature, right? And so we're pretty much the average where we work from January to sometimes May. And that's pretty much normal for the country. And inside those 5 or 6 months, we can entertain over 1,000 pieces of legislation. It goes way too fast for anything that you would imagine, how the speed of government should really work. So between the House and the Senate, we'll introduce 1,000 pieces of legislation. Inside, let's see, that first week that we're here is the deadline to submit legislation, so there won't be any new things after that. And then we'll go through committees, and an average committee in an average day can see 15 to 20 bills in the beginning. So they're giving us very little time, even in terms of a heads up before we're going to be voting on bills. But out of all those pieces of legislation that move between the House and the Senate, probably only 500 to 700 actually go to the governor, and then even less get signed. But so I've been here for 6 years, and out of every year I've seen over 1,000 bills go through the process. I've only ever seen 2 or 3 Democrat bills make it anywhere through the process. to any kind of, through all those different stages. So what you would imagine deliberation is very one-sided. I mean, I think it even undermines the whole idea that we're even practicing democracy here. Because I mean, in my understanding of democracy would mean that nobody is so much more smarter or has so much more money or there's nothing about them that should mean they automatically prevail, where their opinion is just goes forward, right? You would imagine that we're discussing things, that we're, even if it's not a debate, that we're at least bringing up different points of view. But it's never like that. The party that is in control has entire control over everything that we do here. And the crucial part is that they have control over our agenda. They decide what bills we hear, what bills we don't hear. They decide who sits at what committee. Right now, I think both of our education committees in the House and in the Senate are 5 Republican and 2 Democrat. So whatever they want to do just always happens automatically.
But I would add to that, so the fact that Democratic bills under a Republican majority in the legislature and then the Republican party controlling the executive branch, just because so few bills don't get signed or actually do get signed is not a product or is not evidence of democratic ideas or issues that our caucus brings up. It's not a sign that these ideas aren't worthy or aren't good solutions, because we also have countless examples where Democrats for several years will introduce legislation either to reform and empower our public schools, to expand access to Medicaid for children. There's a slew of other legislations that we introduce, in addition to, during session, amendments that we will introduce that, if it has a D in front of the name, the majority caucus in this triangle, so House, Senate, and the governor being one party dominated, just completely disregard it. But you can take the same exact bills and ideas and replace the primary sponsor from a D to an R, and then suddenly it becomes a good idea, worth debating and worth noting. And we've seen this again, time and time again, with bills that are introduced and then also with amendments that go forward.
So can you just kind of go over how a bill gets sealed, how it even comes to get debated?
Yeah, so how do you even introduce a bill and debate it? So, every single lawmaker has the potential to create legislation, and we work with our staff, our policy analysts. We have a team of lawyers who write the legalities and help us amend the statute so that we can achieve what we're trying to attempt at the legislation. So once we have that in a bill form, then whoever that main lawmaker is then goes and runs around and tries to find co-sponsors. So fellow lawmakers who will endorse the original idea that the bill is trying to achieve. So once you have all the co-sponsors you want as the main sponsor, it's called prime sponsor, you then go into that office there and it's like a file. Like you just literally drop it into like a filing cabinet. And once you drop it there, you can't take it out, and it's officially in a bill. And so they take it, they put it on the website, they give it a bill number. Any bill in the House will say HB, and we'll start with the 2, and it's the 2000s and up. Anything that starts in the Senate gets an SB, and it starts with the 1. So it goes from 1001 to however many bills lawmakers want to introduce. Then the Speaker of the House is obligated by law to assign every bill to a committee. There's no mechanism that makes the Speaker have to do it at the beginning of session, so if the Speaker wants to wait till the very end of session, that's one way that the majority party can kill or ensure that bills don't move forward. This Speaker was pretty good about assigning bills to committee early on. The previous Speaker, under David Gowan, was very notorious for sitting on bills and assigning them like the day we were going to get out of session. And then this is where the chairs, so if you're sitting in an aisle seat, I would say these four desks on both sides, most likely the names at those desks are people who chair a committee. And so the chair is like a mini speaker for that committee. They make all the decisions, what's going to be on the agenda, what's going to be heard, who gets to talk, how much time people have to talk, if the committee's going to meet, how long the committee's going to meet. And so at that point, your bill, if it gets assigned to health, it's going to be Heather Carter who decides whether the bill moves forward. If your bill does get a hearing, then it's an opportunity for the public to formally weigh in and provide testimony and evidence, either in support of a bill or in opposition of a bill. And if it passes out of that main committee, there's one more committee it goes through, and then it goes back to the speaker, and the speaker gets to decide once again whether or not the bill will move forward. And there's two formal calendar assignments that the bill has to go through. One is called Committee of the Whole, which is where you probably traditionally think like your representatives and senators are going back and forth and grilling each other with questions and really trying to dig into the fine details. And so that kind of debate that you think about happens in the Committee of the Whole, and then actually voting on the bill. And voting on the bill, the only statement that you can ask, you can no longer go back and forth between members. All you can do is explain why you're voting a certain way on that bill. And so you can vote yes, you can vote no, you can not click your button and it records you as present, or if you're not here, it depends if it was an excused absence, that's worked out with the speaker ahead of time. And then once your bill passes out of a chamber, passes out of the House, it then does the whole thing all over again in the other chamber. Yes.
Okay, so I want to paint a picture. I'm going to go back to 2017 and what it looks like. We were listening to a House bill related to vouchers. And so it was obviously assigned to the Education Committee. Here in the House, there's 6 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And you can always go online and check the agenda. And people did, because they were very concerned that we were going to be expanding vouchers, which is a way for people to, if they have children with disabilities, if they're in military, or if their child goes to a DF rated school, they can take a voucher and then go to a private or charter school or something like that, right? And people who support public education, who are passionate about our public education system, were very concerned. And they knew that the bill was going to be the first bill heard. And so what ended up happening, the committee starts at 2 p.m., visualize one of the floors downstairs, one of the rooms completely full, that they had an overflow. And the committee of the chair, Representative Boyer, made a move. Because you see, when you have a lot of people who are opposed to your bill, they can manipulate the rules because they are the ones in power. And so what they did is they moved that bill where it was in the front all the way to the end. And so you had these community members, parents, teachers, concerned people ready to testify, who did everything that they needed to do to be here at 2 p.m., getting childcare, making arrangements, planning on being here anywhere between 3 to 4 hours. But guess what? That education committee had more than 5-10 bills. And so before you knew it, it was now 5-6 o'clock, and I don't remember the exact time frame, but then the room slowly started to be less full. People were slowly leaving. Then they took a break to get dinner. And then as that break was happening, people started to fill those empty seats. And those empty seats began to be filled with people that supported the voucher programs. People that are pro-charter schools, and there's nothing wrong with that. But clearly, they knew somehow that the system was going to be manipulated in their favor and against the parents and the community members that were there for or in opposition of. And so I describe this because you have to know and understand, because so often we, regardless of our party affiliation, believe and trust in a democracy that is fair, and we all know and feel and understand what that level of fairness is. But unfortunately, we have a system that is manipulated by the people with the power. And so, of course, that bill was being heard way into past 11 p.m. And it didn't matter, because guess what? It passed. And so then now, once it passed out of committee, the committee of the whole is here, this space where we have Republicans and Democrats, all 60 of us, that get to debate this bill. And we didn't know when the bill was going to be coming up. We're kind of at the beck and call of our colleagues, the Republicans. We had an idea that we were going to hear it, but we just didn't know when. And then suddenly the night before, on a Wednesday night, after 3 p.m., we're told that we were going to be debating this very important bill the next day. And not only were we going to be debating this important bill the very next day, but this bill suddenly became much larger with lots of changes and things that had not been discussed in committee, if I recall correctly. So then now we have to start preparing. And then here's the funny thing. A month earlier, I had a colleague, a Republican colleague who I absolutely admire. He came up to me and he's like, Representative Blanc, are your 25 Democrats going to be no on this voucher? I go, heck yeah. I'm like, are your 5 going to stay strong? And so that Thursday, actually, I talked to him that Wednesday night just to check in and say, hey, what's going on? He looked like he'd been beaten. Not physically, emotionally. His eyes were blazing red, and guess what? He'd been pulled into Governor Ducey's office because they knew he was going to be a no vote. And they did everything that we call twisting arms and trying to convince why he had to be a yes vote. And that arm twisting happened. That whole entire Wednesday going into Thursday, and then we saw it when we were actually starting to debate. We saw it. When they thought somebody was on the verge of becoming a no vote, they'd grab that person and put him into the speaker's office, or they would have governor's people show up. And they do and say things like, we will run somebody against you. I know this because that's what he told me. We will have money spent against you to make sure you do not come back. So I point this out because oftentimes people get discouraged and wonder why can't and why are they not listening to us. The reality is that, quote, absolute power corrupts absolutely is so true. And then the gentleman who had come to me a month earlier and asked me if we were still 25 strong ended up being the deciding vote. Passing. But here's the thing. That year in 2017, we had a group of 10 to 12 moms and community members that were really interested and invested, and they saw and experienced everything that we experienced. And that small group became the Save Our Schools group. And that small group collected over 170,000 signatures to put that voucher bill on the ballot, which we are going to see this November, Proposition 305, which must be a no vote. Because the people clearly did not want this. And so it is because of the people, everyday Arizonans who care about important issues, that move things forward. So I just wanted to paint the picture of why oftentimes things feel like they're not getting done. They're getting done.
What's the number of votes that it takes to win something in the House?
31 votes in the House, 16 votes in the Senate to pass. So if a bill gets 30 votes, there's 60 members. That's not a majority. Even if that's a majority of the people present, the bill still fails. And the same is true in the Senate. So I have to step out pretty soon, but I also want to give an example. So we've described structurally how the process works, and it really depends on the personality of the chairperson on how that committee gets run. And so there's examples where some chairs will just put out an agenda and then switch the bills for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's to stifle the public voice, sometimes it's because stakeholders they want aren't there yet, or they haven't come to an agreement. But I can tell you, just because a bill doesn't go all the way through and make it to the governor's desk doesn't mean that the public can't make a difference, even in a majority setting. And a great example of that is a bill that I had introduced this year. It made national news. It actually made international news because our prisons were only providing women who were incarcerated 12 feminine pads a month. Did you all hear about that bill? And that's powerful that you heard about it, because you would think, since it made such widespread news, it got so much attention, you'd think that it'd desk eventually. But what had happened was a committee chairman graciously, because again, it's very rare for the Republican chairman to ever give a Democratic bill a hearing, agreed to give the bill a hearing, and had the stakeholders not shown up to testify, and the stakeholders being OBGYNs who could speak to the importance of all the men on the committee, because the committee had no women, but the speaker thought that bill was best in a committee where only men could formally weigh in. So educate them on the importance of why we need more than 12 pads a month. We had attorneys who were monitoring the prisons, because our prison system is currently being sued by the courts for, you'll never guess it, neglecting the healthcare needs of our inmates. And this isn't a product of the prisons, like this is decisions by the governor, because the governor appoints the people in every single government agency who then run the department. And so this is a failure, not just of the prisons, this is a failure in leadership of the governor for not appointing a director who can avoid being sued by inmates for neglecting their healthcare needs. But the most important thing, and this is why you as a community next session should be a part of the conversation, should meet with us directly, should testify in committee, is the women who had been impacted by the policy, the women who were formerly incarcerated at Perryville, showed up and testified and talked about how degrading and humiliating that experience was, and how when they didn't have enough for that menstrual cycle, they would get punished for it, even though it wasn't their fault. And because of their testimony, there were 4 Democrats and 5 Republicans on that committee. And so we needed one friend from the other side of the aisle to keep that bill going. And it was because of their testimony and the power of their stories and their firsthand experiences that one Republican decided to support the bill and gave us the majority needed to keep it going forward. And at that, I referenced the second committee. It's called the Rules Committee, because ultimately that's where the bill died. The Rules Chairman, also a man, Representative Shope, the representative with the most prisons in his district than any representative, decided to side with the prisons instead of the women. But the women and activists and organized groups who saw the indignation of what was happening to women organized direct action, a campaign called Let It Flow that was driven on social media, where they called for people to send him pads and tampons to give to the women in prison. They said, hey, well, if you won't give the bill a hearing, maybe you can hand deliver it. And he was freaking out. But that action Just like Red for Ed, when the teachers went out for a week, refusing to go back to the classrooms, and still we came up with a budget that worked on their demands, that action, if you can build enough momentum, you can still get change immediately. And so CNN, a national news network, picked up that story. And the moment CNN and then Bloomberg and the Dow Jones, all these national news organizations were talking about that representative and our prisons, the moment they started talking about it, we got the phone call that we need about how the prison was going to fix it immediately. So not only did the women win triple the amount of feminine hygiene products they were getting, but the first time in Arizona history, they were also going to get tampons, which is amazing. But that's why having diverse representation also matters, because beforehand, I don't think any other representative or senator ever looked into that issue. And so when you're thinking about who your representatives are, and you're doing research on each one, like go to our member pages, see what bills we're introducing, see if it benefits your community, if it hurts your community, or if it doesn't even address your community at all. Because it ultimately matters. Without that bill, without that committee hearing, and most importantly, without the women's stories, the women in prison would still be facing that really stark reality. And there's a lot more work that needs to be done on that issue. But I think both examples, you have a negative example where unfortunately against public will, a voucher bill went through, but then the people resisted through the ability to refer something to a law to the ballot, but then legislation doesn't have to go all the way through the process to still get things done. And you never know, it can lay the groundwork for the next year or the year after. And I know
you have to go, but I speak in prisons across the nation. I'm from San Antonio, Texas. I speak on the empowerment of women, so if you need help in that department, let me know.
Do you have a card?
I don't.
Did you get my card?
I got your card, and I tagged you to my social media so you can see. I had specific instructions from the mayor of San Antonio to partner with Arizona for the work that I was doing for the city of San Antonio. So I came specifically to talk to you. If you need help, let me know.
Do you live here or San Antonio?
I live in Scottsdale.
You live in Scottsdale? Yeah, let's set up a meeting.
Okay.
You'll send me an email?
I'll send you an email.
Yeah, lots more legislation. And so this is how you can also help us with our issues. So yes, I will look out for your email. Thank you for that.
More like characteristic I want to share about us, and then I'll talk about how you all can be involved, and there's multiple levels of how you can be involved, and we even have an app where you can sign up here while you're here, and you can start following legislation and get alerts to when we're doing stuff. But one more thing I wanted to pull back just to kind of explain a little bit like the chaos that we work in. What do you think the average pay is for a politician? Anybody want to guess how much politicians get paid at the state level? What did you say?
30 an hour.
30 an hour? I don't know what it would be like if my salary was hourly. I'm pretty sure we'd be making under minimum wage. They pay $24,000 a year to be a politician, and right. So you can imagine only certain people apply or run for office when the pay is so little. So that's another kind of like thing that contributes to who's here and what is actually getting done. But so other ways that you can get involved, right? So like we described how this place can be pretty chaotic from our day-to-day, from the whole, how fast everything fits into just 5 months. And I don't know if anybody's heard of the phrasing or the idea of like what a house of cards is. Like just a fragile thing that gets passed off as like a real structure. And that's a lot of what politics is. Learn how to take advantage of a lot of the chaos that happens here. So there have been multiple times where the community has just become outraged about what we have introduced or what we said we're going to start talking about. And we've gotten so many phone calls and so many emails that people have just pulled their bills and don't talk about them anymore. Right? So that's a lot of the very like the front line of how you can be a part of the legislation that's getting talked about. You can stop us from talking about things just as much as you can compel us to talk about things. right? But it takes a lot of people being involved. One of the legislators that I'm thinking about with the piece of legislation, he wanted to make it to where like students weren't going to be able to vote in their at their colleges. So many people called, he pulled his phone out of the wall and just gave up on it, right? And so that's a lot of what we take advantage of. And then the email side, so many people will email us telling us to stop to vote against a bill that it'll make it to where we can't use our email. Like there's so many in messages in our inbox that we can't see messages from our leaders, we can't see messages between each other, and then it makes it to where it's hard for them to organize. They don't know what the move is, they don't know what their leaders are trying to tell them to do because they're not able to get in contact with them. And especially if we're tying up their phones at the same time, right? So there's a lot of work how you can be involved, and a lot of it is in the first 2 months. So January and February are the most important parts of the year for you all to be involved. And when we're done in this floor, we'll walk you down to the first floor. There's a couple of computers where you can set up an account, tell them what kind of bills you're interested in, and then you'll get alerts whenever we're talking about those kinds of things.
Is that the request to speak?
Yeah, the request to speak, yeah. You have to set the account up here, and then once you do that, then you can use your phone or computer at home to engage with us. And you can also submit messages online. So if you're not able to come down here and speak in committee, you can write us a letter that we will see before we're voting on things. If you're, there are some committees that'll even read out all messages from the people who submit them, but at the very least, we see them before we're voting. So before we vote, it'll tell us, 87 people said no to this, and 20 people said yes to this, right? And it definitely helps us build arguments against what we're doing to make it look like, a lot of people are afraid to do something if a lot of people are watching. And that's what a lot of what we're aiming for. That's why we need you involved. We need you to be more active citizens. So we'll definitely help you set that up. But is there any other questions you guys have before we move from this room? Is there anything that you wanted to add?
Okay, so let's talk about the room really quick, right? So this is the space, it's really important. Obviously, you'll notice there's 60 desks, and on the desk is our little button where we are voting. So if we vote yes, we push the green. No, it's red. And then the request to speak is when we are debating, we push this button, and our name will appear up here. This is where the speaker sits, along with the chief clerks who keep track of everything, including the rules and making sure that we're not breaking the rules. It's a lot of decorum, which is incredibly intimidating, I have to say. Then the boxes on the side are typically where journalists, writers will sit, or staff oftentimes. When we are debating bills, no one except authorized staff and legislators can be on the floor. The gallery is upstairs. That's where people can sit and watch what is happening. And were any of you guys here for the Red for Ed movement in May, April, May? Anyone? Okay, well, you guys missed school, more than likely. I have to tell you, I don't think we'll ever see anything like that.
I hope we will. Yeah.
I mean, I hope so too, but I don't think we will. I just want to paint this amazing picture. So, the teachers struck on a Thursday. And on a Wednesday night, I went and spoke to teachers at Tempe High, and I remember one of the, Mr. Palacios was really excited. He's like, yeah, we're expecting 30,000. And we've been part of marches and protests and organizations. Normally that 30,000 really means like 10, 12,000, right? And I was like, wow, that's a really big number. When we showed up that Thursday, and when I saw the visuals from the air, it was over 50,000 plus people. It was a sea of red marching their way to the state capitol. It was amazing, right? And here's the thing, most people are unaware that we only do business from a Monday to a Thursday. Fridays are a rest day, I guess you can call it. So a lot of the teachers had no idea. They actually thought we were just gonna go on vacation. I mean, we are, but it was planned. It's not like we didn't show because we didn't want to show up. But what was really amazing is, I know we came on Friday, and I wasn't expecting to see as many teachers on Friday. And you might recall, it was really hot on those 2 days. It was super hot. And I can tell you, based on information that I know, that Governor Ducey's people, I think they really legitimately believed teachers were going to take time off and go on vacation. My colleagues across the aisle had no idea that these teachers were ready for each day. So on that Monday, when we came back to work, again, I think we were shocked that thousands of teachers were still here. We were greeted by hundreds of teachers in the parking lot. It was amazing. And what was more amazing is that momentum continued on Monday, on Tuesday, and on Wednesday. But what was more phenomenal is seeing all of those seats filled, something I had not seen. Granted, I've only been here for 2 legislative sessions, but not only these seats. The hallways were full, packed with people by the televisions. Every hearing room here was filled with people on chairs, on the floor, in the seats where typically legislators sit. And they were here until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning when we voted on the bill. And what was more phenomenal is you have to know that it is really abnormal for us, but it's a tactic, right? It's abnormal for us to be listening to budgets in the middle of the night. It's been normalized because if you listen and debate budgets, the actual state budget in the middle of the night, those seats always sit empty. So there are no witnesses to the madness. But you see, this was the first time, well, that I'd ever seen, that every seat was filled and there were witnesses. And if they didn't stay here and they went home, I had a woman text me or message me on Facebook, and she said, my 16-year-old daughter is addicted. She watched the budget until it ended, so we started debating here in the House the budget, I think around 8 or 9 p.m., because it was also a waiting game. I really do believe that my colleagues thought that the seats were going to start emptying out, because you see, the teachers had been here all day. And then they started going home at 4 or 5 o'clock. What we didn't know is they were probably going home just to take a rest and a break and a shower, and then they came back, and the Capitol buildings started to fill. There were lines. And here we were, continuing to debate. Yes, the seats started to empty just a tad after 3 a.m. I was still sitting there at 6 a.m. and guess what I started to see? The seats filling up once more. Not only here, but in the hearing rooms. We were, I think, debating until 9:30 a.m. and by that time, the grounds were full of teachers. So I want to paint that picture because we had thousands of teachers and community members who actually experienced and witnessed what actually happens at the state ledge. And oftentimes, we do have thoughtful debate, and we do always bring up really excellent points, but because the House and the Senate and the governor's office is managed by a one-party system, they have literally all the power. However, it was the people who moved the governor's office. It was the people who forced the governor to quote-unquote give a 20% raise, but we also have to be careful because it was not a 20% raise, and it's only good for 1 year. Because see, if you hold out long enough as people and as the teachers did, they kind of, sort of, maybe a little bit won, sort of, if we can call it kind of a win, but it was because they were showing up. The teachers actually understood what was happening though, because they got to see it and experience it. And so that's the power of the people. And so I know Senator Mendez said if you go on the Request to Speak system and sign up, or what I always tell young people and people of all ages, think of those 3 issues that are really important to you, that you are completely passionate about, that move you, that drive you. We all know what those are. I think you mentioned probably criminal punishment reform. I don't like calling it criminal justice because there's no justice in our criminal system. So this year is going to be pivotal, 2019, because there's a move, I think, to actually move criminal punishment reform so it is more justice. And so identify who those people are. If you are concerned about, let's say, education-related issues, if you are interested in learning about how to support small business, I connected with a small business person, and you know what I found out? I actually found out that small businesses oftentimes are led by, well, in the Latino community, with people that may not be properly documented, but they're still business owners. And they're experiencing some form of ism in trying to open up a business in certain areas, because unfortunately we have people that abuse those that may not speak English well, right? But if we're truly supportive of small business, we should be making it easier for them to find a spot, to run a legitimate business, because it is those small businesses that really enhance our communities. And I know if it's happening in the Latino community, I guarantee it's also happening in other communities that are not predominantly English speaking. So my point is, make it easy. We can't be warriors of everything, but you can certainly find those 2 or 3 things that you're absolutely passionate about. Make sure you know who your state representative is. And if your state representative may not represent the same values as you can find people outside as well.
Well, so we're gonna get up in a second and go walk down to the bottom, the first floor on the east side of the building, right? So this side of the building. But as we're getting up, I want you to think about how this election year, we elected our first legislator with disabilities, where she's gonna be having to come around here with a wheelchair. And we've never had that before. So I want you to think about what it's going to be like for her, and what we're going to have to do in terms of upgrades so that this place is accessible for her. But I mean, it just speaks to the idea that we don't imagine people coming here and using the legislature, like everyday people. So we're going to make some changes, but only because we're forced to, right? So keep that in mind. And then I wanted to point out this seal. You guys can take a picture before you leave. At the top of it, it says Dite Ditat Deus. It means God provides, right? And it's from this really old kind of thinking back when people were first trying to take over the desert, and they thought if they could just plow the desert, God would do the rest of the work and bring rain. It's just a weird kind of like mentality to bring towards the desert. But I like to point it out. It's kind of weird. But so then we'll start walking downstairs now.
Anyone wants to get a picture, go ahead.
Oh yeah, we should do a picture up here.
There's a lot of embedded Asian roots in relationship to our Japanese Americans who lost everything and were brought here to the concentration camps. Yes. And they ended up staying here and being embedded into this community, and it's something that oftentimes we fail to talk about. And so I want to highlight something of why. So in 2010, you guys were probably like in, I don't know, preschool. But in 2010, you might recall that year was really intense. It was an intense year because in the state of Arizona, SB 1070, which is a papers, please law, which allows the law enforcement to stop and ask people for their papers, passed. In 2010, another law, which is the banning of Mexican American studies. And why this is important is because when we start to talk about America, oftentimes our history from our perspective as people of color, as women, as children, as immigrants is never told, because we know that amazing African proverb that the story is told by the hunter but not by the lion's perspective, and oftentimes it is the lion who did everything to avoid capture and death, but the hunter has all the tools and the ability to tell the story. So why that's important, because I have to tell you why I do my very best to speak to constituents, because in 2010 it was the first time that I decided to write my legislators. It was the first time that I felt really passionate about SB 1070, but I didn't even know what to say about SB 1070. But I could relate to Mexican American studies. And I remember writing a personal letter to all my representatives and my senator. And guess what? I knew they were going to vote no, because they were Democrats. But it was a personal letter, and I never heard from them. And anytime I get a personal letter from any constituent, whether I agree or disagree with them, I will make my very best to connect with them. And the reason I do that, because I know what it's like to be ignored. And it's not a good feeling, especially when you are writing a personal story. But in 2010, I remember seeing video, because I wasn't here and I wasn't present. And when you think about how policy is created, it's really created out of people's ideologies that lack understanding of our history and oftentimes of facts and information. So Tucson was doing Mexican American studies, because what they noticed is that in Tucson Unified School District, Latinos, African American, indigenous kids were failing and not graduating from high school. And they wanted to solve that problem, so they created this class. And so you had kids who really felt discouraged, because so oftentimes the one topic theme that all of us, regardless of our background, should come, whether you're white or whether you're Latino, African American, or indigenous, we all are coming and learning about American history in the same way. So we're coming with the same kind of level of understanding. But the thing is that it is kids of color that always get discouraged, because oftentimes the storybooks are told from the perspective of the hunter, always overlooking the perspective of those, and I can't even name the great African Americans or the Latinos or Asian Americans or all those many people who fought. In fact, when we think of Helen Keller, what do we know of Helen Keller? She was blind and overcame her blindness, muteness, and deafness.
Yeah.
That's it. It's like her life started and ended before the age of 18. But the thing is, after the age of 18, she was one of the founders of the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union. She fought against Woodrow Wilson and his very racist ideologies. She was a fighter and defender of basic American justice, but no one knows that. So Mexican American studies proved that these kids suddenly felt a connectedness, suddenly started to understand, oh my God, my people have value. Started to know and understand, oh my gosh, it's because of people who protested and who fought why we have some form of equal rights, and why we have some form of voter rights, and why we actually have worker rights. It is because people like us. And so guess what? These kids became avid learners. They started graduating from high school, and oftentimes they wanted to go on to college. And so we had a state legislature that was so driven by hate. They didn't care what these kids had to say, because all they wanted to say was, no, it's you, la raza. You want to topple down this American justice system. They didn't care. They were so driven by their hate that they voted to ban Mexican American studies. That was 8 years ago. And last year, in 2017, the courts found that this law was written and passed because of animus, hate, because of racism. So I paint the picture because if we weren't so driven by the isms of the world, and if we actually provided our students and young people, especially our kids of color, the opportunity to really understand the roots of this America and how it came to be so great, it's because of the oppressed and the people who were constantly reminded they were less than, incapable. They stood up and they fought. It is because of immigrants, including white immigrants from Ireland, Germany, who were seen as less than when they came to the United States. It is our history. So I just wanted to share that because these spaces are so important, and there is policy and politics in everything that we do, including your guys' classroom, including in your school districts. And oftentimes kids forget and parents forget the power that they have to come together. To actually, and it starts in our communities at the local level. So oftentimes we're focused on what's happening at the federal level, and trust me, I'm very concerned of what's happening at the federal level. But it's everything that's happening to us locally that has the most impact to us daily. So that is why your presence is here, and I know Mr. Mendez and I would be so honored and privileged to do something special in November to make sure everyone is here and present. But then I also think, as I tell a lot of new people from different places and spaces that look like me, and we all have this shared thing, because I am an immigrant to the United States. I was undocumented. So if a former undocumented poor girl that lived here just 2 blocks west of the state capitol could be elected in 2016, the same night that the man who came out calling Mexicans like me rapists and criminals, it gives me hope. But we need you all to be more engaged. We need to start seeing more of the different faces, the diversity of thinking and ideology, but then we also need to start challenging ourselves to be more critical thinkers, because we all have a foundational belief system, and I believe it to be that we all want to be successful, not just for ourselves, but for our kids and our future. If we can just start there and have conversations about moving forward, that's where we can really start to move ourselves forward together. That's all I have to say about that.
Cool. So unless you guys got any more questions, I don't know if there's anything else that we wanted to do.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What is the significance of this room?
So this is a committee room. And so this is one of the barriers for getting bills passed. Before we vote on them and the main floor where we all were, they have to pass this room first.
Okay.
Right?
So this is where I mentioned, like, where there's only 3 Democrats and 6 Republicans. I think I'm in local and international, and I think that one's a little bit more fair. It's 3 Democrats and 4 Republicans.
Okay.
That's pretty much average. They're only really afraid of the education committee, and that's really because they can't even trust all the Republicans, and so that's why they stack even more Republicans in there. Any questions or?
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
And then the other thing too that I think education, for example, is they say that half the budget goes to education, right? But here's the thing. In 2008, Arizona's budget was around $10 billion, $9 billion, okay? 2008, that was 10 years ago, right? And then, of course, we had the economic crash. And yes, in the state of Arizona, the other thing that we fail to recognize is that the state is reliant on 2 forms of taxes, right? It's your personal income tax and sales tax. That's it.
Well, there's more, but that's what it's too heavily favored on that side.
Yeah, it's too heavily favored on that side. Yes, right? And in that same time frame, our state has grown in population. We have 500,000 more people in the state of Arizona. So basic math tells us that if we have more people in the state of Arizona, we should be bringing in more money. But our budget has not grown at all.
We don't allow it to grow. We try to choke and kill government so that there's less money to spend on you all, right? And we pay taxes in all different kinds of ways, right? So you talked about sales tax, which doesn't affect everybody the same way, right? A dollar to you does not mean the same thing as a dollar to somebody who, shopping at Food City, right? And then there's what was the other tax you said?
Personal income tax.
Personal income tax, right? And then there's property tax, and then there's a thing called what's the gains tax, capital gains tax.
Oh.
Right? Have any people heard about that? Right? That's people who have so much money, their money makes more money. We've cut taxes on that pretty much all together. And then, I mean, well, so people look at taxes differently, right? Some people think of taxes like if it's assaulting you and you know, forcing you to pay taxes. But I think of taxes as like a responsibility where, you know, it's all of our duty to pay taxes, right? I like to think of taxes as like a promise, right? A promise that you keep to the past and a promise that you make to the future, right? Like we're all still paying taxes to pay off you know, the schools that you went to that were built a long time ago are still needing to be, you know, updated and for maintenance. So you're paying taxes to pay for those things in the past. And then we all want there to be schools for Ryan when he gets older, right? So we're paying taxes for there to be schools for him.
So what happens with the money that's over the 9 billion? So if
So the very first thing that we do before we spend any money is we give money back to people. We cut taxes on
called
businesses.
tax credits, and that's the thing. So like I think the word taxes has been manipulated in such a way. For example, you know, the Boston Tea Party was because no taxes or no representation. Wait, what was that?
No taxes without representation.
Yes, no taxes without representation. Right, but here's the thing. This is not 1700 and something, right? In the 1700s, people were collecting taxes. It was kings and queens that were collecting taxes for their personal wealth. That is the difference, right? Right now, taxes, it's a social contract with each other, with ourselves. So literally this idea, going back to American history and why we have to really understand it, taxes in the 1700s, taxes, no taxation without representation meant, I, in Boston, do not want to send my money to enrich the pockets of the kings and the queens and their families. That's a different type of tax.
But today's totally different. Today people are saying they don't want to pay taxes because they don't want to pay for your schools.
But I also think it's because people fail to understand. Because remember, in school you're taught no taxes without representation. Or no.
But the evils are in the details.
Yes.
So a lot of time, for example, I would argue why we have 70 plus number of school districts. Each has only one school.
I would have to check on that.
Yes.
Yeah, I heard that too.
Yeah.
So maybe why I have to pay tax to pay for this king or queen, and we get a different name called administrator, called it the superintendent. They get $250,000 pay per year.
Well, but
They don't teach.
that's what we're getting at though. You shouldn't think of taxes as just individually and it's not just because of you and who you are.
Evils are in details.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to look into the details. And those people get a really, really high pay, but they don't even teach.
Yeah,
According
it's way worse
to-
than the private and charter schools.
Yeah.
According to whoever said that all the education funding, less than 50% go into teaching.
Yeah, that's not true.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's not true. So the
That's
thing
what I'm
is,
saying, evils in
yeah,
the
yeah.
details.
No, right. But
And
but
Arizona
that's-
is the least. Arizona puts less money into administration than every other state.
It's less than 6%.
Wow.
Yeah.
So evils are in the details.
See, we
I
don't
think
know about
then
Yeah.
we're going to debate on some of the details.
Yeah, but I mean,
But that's a great conversation, though,
Yeah.
right? It's and why that conversation is so important is because in politics, there's always sound bites and manipulation of information. That's a reality, right? And it's created that way to create divisiveness, right? And it's really obvious when it comes to public schools and the word school choice, right? School choice gives us this idea that I as a parent get to pick the school for my child, right? But really, school choice is a way to cripple us into thinking that somehow our public schools are doing less than. But here's the thing, right? The public schools have been struggling for 2 decades because this body has stopped funding education for the most part. I mean, it's so important. That's like a conversation.
Yeah, I think
That's like a
if
whole
you
conversation.
guys had some sort of like a reference materials, reports, please let us know. Then we can read about it.
Grand Canyon Institute does a really phenomenal job.
Okay.
So what, do you want to tell them about the charter schools?
What about them?
So charter schools, which is the school choice movement, they're literally for profit. And that is what's happening. And there's no accountability or responsibility in relationship to how the money is spent. But the thing is, that's a whole conversation. I don't know what it looks like, but it could be like a whole training on education, because the most important thing is,
101 at our this Sunday.
Yeah.
At our Lions Club, and it's nonpartisan meeting 101, just how education is funded.
And there's 2 types of charter schools. There are public charter schools,
Yeah.
and then there's private schools that are charter schools. And I think one of the problems with private schools, not private, but public charter schools, is that they don't have a public board. So they make decisions with the money. Most of the money
Yeah.
goes to the administrative.
Well,
And
actually, my son went to a public charter school. I mean, they did such a wonderful job. All their
Yeah. And
teachers
it's not-
are just so great.
and charter schools were meant to be in areas where there wasn't access to education, where people, if you lived on a farm and you had to travel like miles, so they were meant to be put in places to give access to people. But then when there's loopholes, there's people that started doing it as a business, and that's when
it's gotten out of hand.
it's gotten out of hand. So
Yeah, and there are some good ones.
Yeah.
Some bad ones.
Oh,
I'm
no,
sure.
yeah. Oh, no, like in anything.
Yeah.
Disparaging the
So-
idea of a
Yeah.
charter school.
I think it's more of they
Seeing
want.
how it's done.
Yeah, and it's more about having accountability for where the funding is going. A lot of the administrators, which are the owners of the charter schools, are making money with public dollars when it comes to real estate, because they're getting money, they're buying themselves real
There's
estate.
one, there's a,
I'm not aware of.
yeah. So you know what? Okay, one more question because we have to go.
Another,
They're actually closing the building.
another story related to education. Indian population quadrupled over the years because most of them come with H-1B visas.
Visas.
And because of the Intel, because Motorola, Honeywell, reason because company cannot find qualified, STEM.
Yes.
Okay. What this tells us, what that means, our education failed us. We spent so much money in there, and we said, well, no, some advocate no choice in the school. We all need to give a public school so they can equally educate.
Everyone.
Well, somebody said, well, equally educate those garbage. Maybe, I'm sorry.
Well, and
nobody want to hire them.
Yeah.
and one of the things that
So, a lot of things, you have to debate both ways. Push this way, push this way.
But
See
there's
what happens.
there's a whole history behind it though too, right? No Child Left Behind in 2001, which really shifted how kids are learning. The fact that we've shifted from teachers actually being able to teach to teaching to test. The fact that we're only focused on reading, writing, and math, when actually a fully educated child looks like a child that has access to art, music, PE programs that are very well rounded in scope. When I went to school, teachers got to teach, right? I loved going to school. It was an amazing place, and there's been such a shift in how we see students in schools. And almost as if, here's the thing, right? It's not about reading, writing, and math. It's about reading and writing and understanding basic math, but it's about having the social skills, but also having access to art programs and music programs and PE programs and things that really enhance our ability to learn. And when kids have access to a variety of programs, they do better. And when they do better, they feel better. And when they feel better, they want to be and become avid learners, right? And so it's really understanding how our education system has shifted so much from one way, which was imperfect in the first place, to something even less perfect that is focused on teaching to test. And it's like a pass-fail. And so if you're a kid, I was a terrible test taker. Still am. If I were to be judged on test taking and I'm a terrible test taker, I'm constantly through my test taking and being reminded that I'm not as smart as, even though I have a lot of smarts. I'm just not great or smart at taking tests. So it's really about shifting our way of thinking about how we see. In Denmark, I think they don't even have kids go to school a full day, and they don't have them do homework. They want kids to be kids, right? Because if they're playing outside, if they're engaging and having social, emotional interactions with people, physical, actual interactions with other kids, they do better, right? If they have access to all those different programs like arts and music and yada yada, they do better. So it's really about, we seem to forget that, you know, as a kid, school looked one way for me. And just because the classroom still has books and a table and chairs and the classroom setup looks the same, it doesn't mean that the way kids are learning is the same. It's totally different. And so we just need to start thinking about, I benefited from all those different programs. I mean, I had PE and I was learning country line dancing, ballet. I remember climbing up a rope. I remember going to field trips, things that I would have never been able to do. We don't do that anymore for our kids. So it's really about seeing it different. Anyway.
I understand you guys are running out of time. Just a question for both of you is that, since that you guys are paid so little, how do you support yourself and your family? That's what I wanted to do something for you guys.
Yeah, well, so the average person down here is retired or independently wealthy, living off their spouse's income.
What about you two?
I'm a community college instructor, part-time.
Okay.
Right,
Which one?
Phoenix College.
Oh, Phoenix College, okay.
Before that, I used to run a nonprofit, but it was too hard doing both at the same time, so I had to close down the nonprofit.
Okay.
I mean, that's why there's that huge age gap, is because the people who are, you know, trying to live lives at the same time, raise families, have a career, aren't able to be a part of your legislature.
Just like my brother J.R.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so many people are just retired and they what is it called when they came to spend their retirement here in Arizona.
Yeah. We have a lot of people that they benefited from pension plans in Democratic states like Michigan, and they retired, so they have fat pension plans. They came to our state because we have low property tax and low tax on everything.
They try to kill our pensions.
And they're killing our pensions, and they don't understand our state, and they don't care about the kids in our state because most of the kids look like us, and they're retired. Like, they literally have brought their extreme views. And
I'm going to add something to what you said earlier, and I know it is important to have not only Latino studies, but the Filipino studies and Chinese studies. Filipinos were a big part of Cesar Chavez's movement for labor. Chinese immigrants, if it wasn't for a case of a Chinese immigrant, none of us would have a citizenship.
We would have another generation.
So those are that's why it's really important to have different, because we're all Americans, but our history is not there. I didn't know that if it was for a Chinese immigrant that I was able to have a citizenship. So it's important, and it's important for everybody to have a seat on the table, not just
have the opportunity to learn the real American history.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's say thanks.
Thank you so much.
In your card, I would definitely encourage